Elephant. Tank destroyer. Roy Cat. Infantry fighting vehicles. Ratel. Badger. Bomb 8. Mraps. Mamba. BAE Hawk. Atlas Cheetah D as system testbeds. Reconnaissance/counterinsurgency. Paramount Maury. Electronic warfare aircraft. Cessna 208. Douglas DC-3. Transport aircraft. C-130 Hercules. C-47 Turbo Dakota.
The 12th edition of Africa's largest aerospace and defense exhibition and air show, which ended Sunday in South Africa, drew aviation experts, companies and enthusiasts. Hundreds of attendees braved the cold weather to get up close to aircraft and see the latest aviation tech at the Air Force Base Waterkloof. A regular attraction at tech shows is Spot the Robotic Dog. Cape Town-based company Deep Tech Solutions thought outside the box to suggest a different use of the robot.
South Africa's position in Africa's arms and defense market has expanded steadily over the past 2 decades, driven by industrial capacity, regional proximity, shifting procurement priorities, and growing dissatisfaction among several African states with traditional European defense suppliers. While France has historically played a dominant role in African defense through arms exports, military cooperation agreements, training missions, and long-standing political ties, that dominance has weakened. In its place, South Africa's defense industry has become increasingly influential across the continent, particularly in land systems, armored vehicles, artillery, surveillance technologies, ammunition, and maintenance services. France's defense presence in Africa has long been rooted in post-colonial relationships, security partnerships, and overseas military deployments. French companies supplied aircraft, helicopters, armored vehicles, small arms, communications equipment, and logistical support to numerous African militaries. These relationships were reinforced by defense cooperation agreements and French military bases in West and Central Africa. Over time, however, political, social, and strategic realities began to shift. Public opposition to foreign military presence increased in several countries. Governments began reassessing procurement dependencies. Defense budgets tightened, and expectations around technology transfer and local industrial participation grew. South Africa entered this environment with a fundamentally different proposition. Unlike European exporters whose supply chains and decision-making centers are based outside the continent, South Africa's defense industry is embedded within Africa itself. Companies such as Denel, Paramount Group, Reutech, and Rheinmetall Denel Munitions developed products specifically adapted to African terrain, climate, and operational requirements. These systems emphasize durability, ease of maintenance, and cost-effectiveness rather than high-end complexity alone. Armored vehicles became one of South Africa's strongest competitive advantages. South African-designed mine-resistant and armored patrol vehicles gained international recognition after extensive operational use. These platforms addressed real-world threats faced by African militaries, including insurgency, asymmetric warfare, and peacekeeping operations. As conflicts across the Sahel, Horn of Africa, and Central Africa evolved, demand shifted toward exactly the categories where South Africa excelled. At the same time, France's defense footprint encountered growing resistance. In multiple African countries, political leaders and populations questioned the effectiveness of French security partnerships and military interventions. Defense procurement decisions became intertwined with broader sovereignty debates. Governments sought suppliers perceived as less politically prescriptive and more willing to engage on equal terms. South Africa, as an African nation with its own history of defense industrial development and non-aligned foreign policy traditions, benefited from this recalibration. Procurement data across the last decade reflects this trend. While France remains a major global arms exporter, its share of new African defense contracts has declined relative to earlier periods. Meanwhile, South African firms have secured contracts not only within Southern Africa but across West, East, and Central Africa. These deals include vehicle supply, upgrades, maintenance, training, ammunition production, and localized assembly arrangements. The cumulative effect has been a measurable shift in market influence. Another factor reshaping the market is the emphasis on regional security solutions. African Union peacekeeping missions and regional coalitions increasingly favor equipment that can be supported regionally. South Africa's proximity allows faster delivery times, easier logistics, and regional training programs. This contrasts with European suppliers whose delivery schedules, export controls, and political conditions can complicate procurement. Technology transfer has become a decisive issue. African governments are no longer satisfied with being end users only. They seek domestic repair capabilities, assembly plants, and knowledge transfer that supports long-term self-reliance. South African defense firms have been more flexible in offering joint ventures, local manufacturing, and skills development programs. These arrangements resonate with governments seeking industrial growth alongside security capability. France's defense industry operates under stricter export control frameworks influenced by domestic politics, European Union regulations, and international scrutiny. While these frameworks serve important oversight purposes, they also slow procurement processes and limit customization. South Africa's regulatory environment, while still governed by international norms, has proven more adaptable in meeting African clients' timelines and specifications. Cost considerations further tilt the balance. Many African defense budgets face fiscal constraints. South African systems often deliver comparable operational effectiveness at lower life cycle costs than European alternatives. Maintenance, spare parts, and training can be sourced regionally rather than internationally. Over time, these savings accumulate, making South African suppliers more attractive for sustained force readiness. The shift is not absolute, nor is it uniform across all African states. France continues to supply advanced aircraft, naval systems, and specialized equipment to certain partners. However, the center of gravity in the African defense market has clearly moved. Where France once held a near-default position in many countries, it now competes in a more crowded and contested environment. South Africa has emerged as one of the most credible alternatives, particularly for land-based systems and integrated defense solutions. Geopolitical realignments reinforce this trend. Africa's defense relationships are becoming more diversified, with countries engaging suppliers from multiple regions to avoid overdependence. South Africa's non-aligned posture and African identity position it as a politically palatable option. Unlike former colonial powers, it is perceived as part of the continent's own industrial ecosystem rather than an external actor seeking strategic leverage. Industrial resilience also plays a role. Despite challenges, South Africa retains one of the most advanced defense manufacturing bases in the global south. Its engineers, testing facilities, and design expertise have produced platforms exported worldwide. This credibility matters in defense procurement, where reliability and proven performance outweigh branding alone. The narrative of replacement reflects cumulative change rather than a single event. France did not exit the African defense market abruptly, nor did South Africa displace it overnight. Instead, procurement patterns shifted gradually as African governments reassessed priorities. Over multiple contract cycles, South African suppliers increasingly won bids that might previously have defaulted to French firms. Regional security dynamics accelerated the process. As African-led security initiatives expanded, demand rose for interoperable, regionally supported equipment. South Africa's defense sector aligned well with this model. Training programs, maintenance hubs, and logistical networks could be established within Africa rather than relying on distant partners. Political symbolism also matters. Choosing an African supplier sends a signal about autonomy and continental capability. Defense procurement is not purely technical. It reflects national identity and strategic orientation. South Africa's role as a supplier carries symbolic weight in this context. France faces additional challenges linked to broader shifts in African foreign policy. Several governments have restructured security partnerships and reduced reliance on external military actors. Even where French equipment remains in service, new acquisitions increasingly diversify away from France. This reduces long-term market share and influence. South Africa's ascent does not imply dominance without competition. Other suppliers, including Turkey, China, and emerging producers, are also active in Africa's defense market. However, South Africa's combination of geographic proximity, industrial maturity, and contextual understanding gives it a distinctive edge. The economic implications are significant. Defense contracts support skilled employment, research, and industrial capacity. As South African firms expand their African footprint, they strengthen domestic industrial ecosystems and regional value chains. This reinforces South Africa's role not just as a supplier but as a hub for African defense production. For African buyers, the shift translates into greater bargaining power. With multiple credible suppliers, governments can negotiate better terms, demand technology transfer, and avoid dependency. This competitive environment benefits procurement outcomes and supports long-term security objectives. France's defense industry remains globally competitive, but Africa is no longer a guaranteed market. The era of default dominance has ended. In its place stands a more multipolar defense landscape where South Africa plays a central role. The continent's security future is increasingly shaped by suppliers that are geographically closer, politically aligned with African priorities, and responsive to local needs. The broader implication is structural. Africa's defense market is maturing. Procurement decisions are becoming more strategic, less historical, and more performance-driven. South Africa's rise reflects this maturation. It demonstrates that African industrial capability can compete effectively when aligned with market demand. As defense needs continue to evolve, especially in response to internal security challenges and peacekeeping commitments, suppliers that understand African operational realities will retain an advantage. South Africa's experience, developed over decades, positions it well within this environment. The shift away from France in key segments of the African defense market is therefore not a rejection of Europe but a recalibration of priorities. It signals Africa's growing confidence in regional solutions and its willingness to redefine long-standing defense relationships. South Africa's expanding role illustrates how industrial capability, political alignment, and market responsiveness converge to reshape influence.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.